It's nice to see you dancing this early, in on Sunday morning actually. And good morning to everybody who is watching us or listening to us in Clubhouse, also being with us on LinkedIn, YouTube, maybe Facebook as well. It's a pleasure to have you with us once again, and I'm very pleased again to welcome Timothy Langley, the CEO of Langley Squire, a government relations and public affairs agency in downtown Tokyo. So, Timothy, thank you very much for joining us this morning again. This is the 195th episode of Japanesepolitics One-on-One. We're very close to the 200th one, so I believe that we'll reach that milestone this year. But I don't want to keep anybody waiting, so I'll give you the mic and I'll give you the screen in a little bit anyway. So to everybody watching us, I apologize for the wind sound here. I decided to try something new this morning, sitting here in my balcony, and there is some nice breeze. It's a little bit chilly, but very refreshing at the same time. So Timothy, before I say a big thank you to our first sponsor, could you please let us know what we are going to listen to or hear from you about?
Great. Thank you very much, Maya, and good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on a Sunday morning at the unbelievable hour of 8:20. But like Maya said, this is 195 times we've been doing this consecutively every Sunday. We so much appreciate your coming and joining us and contributing. We listen to the comments, we watch the likes. We are really compelled and encouraged by your participation. You have told us that you would like to have a more succinct, a shorter draft of the presentations that I give, bring people up to speed as quickly as possible, and then focus on the Q&A. So you might have noticed over the last couple of episodes that the briefing component has been shrinking, but we've been increasing the amount of time on the Q&A. The quality and the number of questions coming up are incredibly increasing, and so we'd like to focus on that. And I think that that's where most of the heat and light comes. I'm broadcasting today from the good ship Grimm's in Umenoshima Harbor. I am in my cabin here. That pole back there is holding up is part of the mast actually, and this is maybe the third or fourth time from this vantage point. So thank you for putting up with me doing my regular things and also broadcasting every Sunday morning, Maya. The yen stands at 152.95 to the yen. The dollar stands to the yen on Friday. That is just a tad higher than it was last week, but a lot of this is reliant upon what's going on in the United States and other markets, and incredibly, what's going on with the U.S. presidential election. The presidential election will be on Tuesday in 2 days. So there's a lot of people looking forward to that, a lot of people. And it looks like the decision will, I don't want to say too much about it, but it will change a lot of things, particularly U.S.-Japan relations if it's Mr. Trump, and probably stay somewhat stable if it's Kamala Harris. So we'll be reporting on that next week, and probably the whole episode is not going to be revealed to us for maybe a couple of months at least, until the president takes office and some executive orders have been initiated and we begin to see what the overall policy will be like. Today is today is Cultural Day. It is observed tomorrow, so this is a 3-day weekend. So everybody's out. Sunshine is out. It rained incredibly hard yesterday, but today and tomorrow should be nice days. The LDP, as you know, lost a majority last week in their election. Of the 465 seats of the lower house, they lost their majority. They lost almost 65 seats. They are below the majority position by 18 seats. They have to have a coalition that includes not just Komeito, but some other party. And it might just be that Komeito is sick and tired of dealing with the LDP, and they bolt, although they've signed an agreement to stay with them. Komeito lost their party leader, the president they had elected just prior to the call of the election. So that's a pretty big deal. 2 members of the cabinet, in fact, lost their seats. And it was the disapproval rating for the prime minister, which was just below 50% before the election when he became elected as LDP president and then prime minister. is now in the low 30s, and that's not a very good sign. The danger zone is 30s. He hasn't been in office for more than 6 weeks, so that's not a very good sign. North Korea fired a very powerful intercontinental ballistic missile on Tuesday. They frequently do these kinds of tests to disrupt or to make sure that people are focusing on them just prior to the U.S. presidential election. But this one is a new solid fuel rocket, which gives them a lot more versatility. They can store the rockets and get them ready to fire more quickly than with the fuel storage. This ICBM flew so high up into the atmosphere, it could hit anywhere, even on the east coast of the United States, given the trajectory. So it's something to be watching out for. The Prime Minister will be traveling internationally. He's got the APEC in Peru from the 15th to the 16th of this month, and then quickly thereafter G20. So the diet session is now going to be held. It was initially scheduled to be on the 7th of this month. It's been pushed to the 11th, and that diet session will be from the 7th to the 14th. The most that they will be able to do is select a new prime minister, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and probably pass a supplemental budget in order to make people fall in love with the current administration just a little bit more. Japan and the EU have formed something of an alliance on military and security affairs. The EU Director of Foreign Affairs was in Tokyo, signed an agreement, forward-looking agreement with the Minister of Defense and the Foreign Minister. It's a pretty big deal. It's like the UN is now coming in to join Australia, the United States, all of these other countries that are coming in to have these bilateral mutual defense agreements with Japan. So there's a lot of action that just hasn't stopped there. And once again, the election is set for Monday, next Monday, not tomorrow, but in 8 days, and we're going to be looking forward to that. Once again, we publish the synopsis every week, and it strikes me that once we publish the synopsis after my Sunday briefing, it usually takes 2 or 3 days to do that. It has a bit of a stale feeling to it because things are moving so rapidly, and that pace is going to continue up until the end of the year. So thank you once again for staying tuned. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Maya. You can give a plug for our sponsors, and then we can get into some of the more beefy things, but then roll this over pretty quickly so that we can get into the Q&A. Maya?
Right. Thank you, Timothy. And yes, very big thank you to our first sponsor, Kanchu, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku, the company that offers bilingual services in Japanese and in English to individuals who want to buy and sell real estate in Tokyo and Yokohama. So Kanchu also does property management and investment property. If you want to work with them, and we do recommend them, please contact James Howell at james@kanachu.com or contact James on LinkedIn, so you can connect with him there. You can also find the company there, and remember, it is james@kanachu.com. So thank you very much for this. Timothy, once again, it is back to you. I'll keep quiet this time, and I'll keep myself on mute because of the wind sound. Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much, Maya. Yes, that wind really hits us. Are you on a microphone, or is this the computer's mic?
This is the computer's mic.
Yeah, maybe that's why. Okay,
Right.
thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, getting back to what happened just this last week and a lot of the analysis. So, those of you that are on this briefing, you're already very familiar. You're keeping up to date on what's happening. You tune in to this program because we try and give you what's going on a weekly basis, what's happening quickly. So I'm assuming that most of you are somewhat up to speed on some of the critical things. But what we're experiencing right now is a irresistible shift in Japanese politics from what we have known for the last 40 years, and we're moving into a new era. The LDP lost its majority. The Komeito lost a lot of seats, and so that coalition that has guided LDP politics, or Japanese politics, in fact, for the last 20 years, with a brief hiatus there, is now just really in flux. So a lot of the things that are going to be happening or that are happening right now that become evident to us in a couple of days or weeks are new situations. So the LDP has got to form some sort of a coalition with another party. But let's just take a look at how they did in the election that just happened this last week. The LDP lost 18 seats in the last election. Komeito lost 8, so it has 24 seats now. But with Komeito, typically the LDP could rely on Komeito because Komeito is the political arm of a lay organization, a Buddhist lay organization, so Kagakai. But their members could be relied upon to vote as they were instructed or as they were educated by the central arm of Komeito. But this time, the voters just didn't quite listen. They didn't pay much attention. The Komeito, the Clean Party government, is in a coalition government with the LDP, and the scandal and the money and the Unification Church. They just got sick of it. And only 5.9 million Komeito voters showed up this time. This is the lowest number of voters that Komeito has been able to come up with. So although the Komeito has a power and a value to the LDP because it comes in strong, it usually brings maybe 32 additional seats. It doesn't do that anymore. It's got 24 seats in the Diet now. And so the LDP is casting a longing look out to who among the opposition parties more closely affiliates with its theory of government or its stance on China or the Constitution or how it views the emperor. There are a couple of candidates that are attractive. The Constitutional Democratic Party wants to be the largest opposition party. Still, it could come into a coalition with the LDP to secure the majority position. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. Probably Mr. Noda would say, I will do that for you, but I would expect the prime ministership as a consequence of that, and that's just not going to happen. The Democratic Party for the People is the more viable choice. They did great. They increased their numbers more than 250%. They started out with, 7 or 8 members, say 7 members, and now they've ended up with 28 members. That's a huge increase, and they are not opposed to many of the positions that the LDP holds. Plus, as an opposition party with that number of seats, that 28 seats, it does now, with LDP and Komeito, eclipse the majority position of the lower house, and that means that coalition can now name the committee chairs and also dictate who is, or at least 50% of who is in the various committees. So it means that the machinery of government moves much more smoothly, and the LDP will do whatever it can to maintain that majority, even if it has to concede several cabinet positions or committee chairs, that sort of thing. That's the horse trading that's going on right now. And as you've been watching the news and the television and the newspapers, if you're here in Japan, and it's just every day, Mr. Tamaki, who is the leader of the Democratic Party for the People, is front and center, always in the news, front page, always talking to the press, because he has this number of members that can make the LDP come back into a majority position. Similarly, though, the Constitutional Democratic Party, which is the number one opposition party, it increased by 50 seats. It's now 148. So it is a real contender for power within the LDP. If it could convince the Democratic Party for the People to join them, they would have a real go at unseating the LDP. Not quite enough, though. So it's just joining with the Democratic Party for the People is not enough to eclipse what the LDP and Komeito potentially hold together. So the gamble right now is the LDP courting the Democratic Party, Mr. Tamaki, the Democratic Party for the People. And so there's a lot of negotiations that's going on here. He has publicly said, I don't want to come into a coalition with the government, the LDP, because they're dirty and they do lots of different things. But in order to capture that majority position, we will join with them on certain positions and refrain on other positions. So we are our own person. We increased and we have a value to the Japanese population, and we're looking for the next election. So we're going to stand by our principles. We're not going to go into a coalition with you, but we will join you in those areas that are important to us and refrain. And in order to do that, they have made certain demands on the LDP, and that's the horse trading that's going on now. There hasn't been a meeting of the two heads, Mr. Ishiba and Mr. Tamaki, yet. That is scheduled for later this week, perhaps Monday or Tuesday. But their lieutenants are meeting, and some of the results of those meetings have come out. Ishin-no-kai, the Osaka-based opposition party led by Mr. Baba, didn't do so well. They captured all of the seats that are in Osaka, so that was a good sign. But their vision of being a little bit more national, not more than regional, a little bit more national, was not a good one. They lost 6 seats, even though they swept the 19 seats in Osaka. And let me see, they lost about 3 million votes that went mostly to the Democratic Party for the People and to other opposition parties. Some filtered out into the LDP as well, but 3 million votes for the Ishin-no-kai is a pretty big punch to the gut for Mr. Baba. There is some conversations going on that maybe he's not suited for the leadership position. I think he'll be able to hold on there. But having not done so very well, I mean, that's a lot of seats, 6 seats to lose when when the Democratic Party for the People increased by, 4 times the number of seats that they originally had. So there's a lot of kind of rumblings that are going on now with the Komeito, the political arm of the religious organization. Their party leader lost his seat. Excuse me. A very unusual shift of circumstances. They just elected him. He was number 2 for the last 14 years because Mr. Yamaguchi, the former head, had been unchanged as the leader for 14 years there, and Mr. Ishii was the number 2. He was Mr. Yamaguchi resigned as the party leader last month in preparation for the election, and Mr. Ishii was elected just prior to the election, and he didn't win his election. So that's pretty daunting for the leader not to even retain his seat. So they're going to go through another election. If you've been watching this channel, you know that with Komeito, they don't have a runoff. They don't have much of an election. They anoint the person that will take over. So I imagine that that's the same thing that they're going to do this time. And the new leader will be elected just this week. I think perhaps tomorrow or the next day. Excuse me. Let me see, where else are we? The other thing that's very interesting here is the faction system that we used to rely on so much to dictate to us who's going to get the cabinet positions and who's on top and who's on the bottom. Although that system has been pretty much fractured, there still is this grouping that is assigned to the members who formerly were faction members. I mean, even though Mr. Kishida said that the factions are just disbanded, organizationally, maybe structurally they're disbanded, but these are people who have been friends and colleagues and voting together and sharing political funds so that they can each get elected. So destroying something like that is very, very difficult. But with regard to how the factions did in the election, the Abe faction, which was the largest faction, went from 54 members of the lower house to 22. So they're the biggest losers here. They lost more than 50% of their standing. The Aso faction, which is currently the only standing officially recognized faction within the LDP, also lost. They went from 40 members to 31 members. The Kishida faction, Mr. Kishida was just formerly the prime minister. He's turned that over to Mr. Ishiba. He initially had 34 members, and by some calculation of what their affinity is for Mr. Kishida, he now stands at 26. Mr. Motegi, who was the Secretary General, you're not hearing much about him over this last week. The news on the election results and the fight and what's going on with how the LDP is going to secure a majority is taking up all the news. But the Motegi faction went from 32 to 27. Mr. Nikai went from 32 to 22, and he decided, you might remember, that he wasn't going to run in this election. He had his third son run in his seat to secure his position. His son lost that election. And then Mr. Moriyama, who initially started with 7, retains his 7 seats. And you will recall that Mr. Moriyama was the first faction to disband when Mr. Kishida said, we're disbanding all of the factions. Everybody's disbanding because of this slush fund scandal. There was never any evidence that Mr. Moriyama's faction had anything to do or participated at all in the slush fund, but they were the first to disband. That's point number 1. And point number 2 is when Mr. Ishiba decided to become prime minister and setting up his cabinet and the positions that were important to him, he chose Mr. Moriyama to be his Secretary General. And it was Mr. Moriyama who insisted with the prime minister, if you want me to be your Secretary General, I'll do that for you, but I have one condition. You must run the election immediately. Don't wait. It is my assessment that you need to do that quickly, even in light of the prime minister saying broadly and loudly that he was going to, if he became prime minister, he would give a lot of time for discussion and evaluation of the situation before he called for election. And he went back on his word. And so many people are looking at Mr. Moriyama saying, you know, the reason for this defeat of the LDP, it's your fault. And it's Mr. Koizumi. Mr. Koizumi, also a candidate for prime minister, was picked by the prime minister to be the election strategist within the LDP. And so a lot of people are pointing fingers to him. I think realistically, though, as most of you pretty much appreciate, no matter what happened with the election, what the timing was, the LDP was going to lose seats. The whole controversy or the whole challenge was, how many seats are we going to lose? If we do it this way, we'll lose this many, but if we do it the other way, we're going to lose far more. I can't envision them losing more than they already did. So many people are saying it was a poor choice of timing. You should have waited. There was no demand that the LDP call for an election when they changed from Mr. Kishida to Mr. Ishiba. He doesn't have to hold an election until the term of the lower house ends later next autumn. So there is a lot of maybe retributions to be had. And in this horse trading that's going on, if Mr. Ishiba is going to be successful in attracting a serious contributor to building this coalition for a majority, he's got 2 cabinet position seats that are open, and maybe some position with the Secretary General, which is held by Mr. Moriyama, to take responsibility. So some of the machinations that are going on is, of the 2 seats, one would go to who the new coalition partner is going to be. Komeito already holds one of those cabinet positions. It would be difficult to imagine that the prime minister would offer 2. One is justice minister, one is for Minister of Agriculture. For the prime minister to offer 2 cabinet positions for this newcomer to come in just so that they can get a majority. But, you know, it's really important to get the majority. And, you know, the fat lady hasn't sung yet. Plus, a lot could ride on who's going to be president of the United States, which is going to be decided on Tuesday. So there's a lot going on there. In other news, the International Monetary Fund has wagged its finger at Japan and warned them, be very careful with how you're going to be spending money, because we all know that once Mr. Ishiba has control of, once he becomes prime minister again, because he's not prime minister now, the Diet has not been in session. He's a layover prime minister, but the Diet must hold a session 30 days after the election to elect the new prime minister. Most money is on Mr. Ishiba, and I think after the election, it will still be Mr. Ishiba, but there's a lot of things going on in between then. But it could be swayed heavily by what's going on in the United States, as is the value of the yen and the economy of Japan. So the IMF is understanding the position that the prime minister is in and warning him, I know you are attracted to the possibility of having a supplemental budget, reducing the gasoline tax, increasing the funds for the disadvantaged, or making the safety nets for the the safety net for the economy a little bit softer, so that the prices begin to tap down. But please be careful, because the typical way that the government does that is they issue more debt. Japan has so much debt, it is twice the size of the economy. The Japanese economy generates a certain amount of revenue every year. The amount of debt that it is carrying is twice that. So they're forewarning the policymakers to be careful in considering that. The Bank of Japan had their typical 2-day session at the end of the month on Tuesday and Wednesday. The governor of the Bank of Japan, Mr. Ueda, listening to what was instructed to him by the prime minister, said, we're going to hold firm the long-term interest rate. We're going to hold firm at 0.25%. So it's relatively easy on bank loans, almost essentially free money when you borrow it. And he's going to continue his position on holding or aiming for inflation at 2%. So all of these pressures that are building on the Bank of Japan to adjust the figures so that the economy begins to take off and the yen begins to strengthen, he's decided to hold firm on that and just play a waiting game. A lot of analysts were waiting for him to announce something. The funds, the stock market is anticipating that. The market is anticipating that, and so it was a little bit of, some would say, cold water poured on anticipation, but also just a more steady hand in a time of great turmoil and indecision. So let me see. With the Democratic Party for the People, they have a couple of demands that have already been announced about what they want to do, and some of this is what their policy positions were in their manifesto when they ran for the elections as well. But these are demands that they're making of the prime minister in order to come over to the coalition side. And all of these issues benefit members who have voted for the Democratic Party for the People, and they all cost money. So the top three are to increase or to reduce the tax on gasoline, and lift the trigger price that's been in place. So once the price of gasoline hits a certain rate, then the Japanese government steps in and flattens the national cost of gasoline, and they want that to be lifted, and they want to have a reduced gas tax. They want to raise the income tax exemption threshold. They want to lower the consumption tax. It's now at 10%. They want it lowered to 5%. And they want to reduce Social Security burden on the younger people and end the co-payment exemption for older people. So once again, telling the older people to have a little bit more cost participation when they go for medical care. There is a co-pay component there. And Mr. Tamaki is insisting that be reduced, thereby reducing the burden on the younger voters. So With the older people, they are typically LDP members, and for the younger, as we've seen in the results of the election, they are massively for the Democratic Party for the People. So that's the attraction there. We don't know which one of these will be accepted. We'll know pretty soon because a lot needs to happen. The election for prime minister will be on the 11th of this month. And the Diet session will open up. The first order of business is to elect the prime minister. And so both houses need to independently have a vote for who the prime minister is going to be. And just as we did with the election for party president of the LDP, there's an initial vote where if any one candidate gets a majority vote, then they become president of the LDP, or in this circumstance, prime minister. And in the event that nobody holds a majority, then they have a second round, which is a runoff, and it's only the two candidates who receive the top number, the first number and the second number of votes, and then there's a runoff there. In the current situation, it is possible that Mr. Ishiba receives the largest number of votes in the first round, and we don't have to have a second round. I don't think that that's feasible. I think there's too many horses to be traded first. And also, the opposition parties, typically in the first round, they just vote for their candidate or for their party president. And then it rolls into the second round. And then people have to either decide they're going to vote for their party president again, thereby making their vote invalid if it's not one of the two candidates, or they have to hold their nose. They have to have made some sort of an agreement with the candidate they are going to vote for, and then they vote for that person. And if that person becomes prime minister, then they get the benefit of whatever it was that they agreed to vote en bloc for that candidate. That's going to happen on the 11th. I think it is pretty clear that Mr. Ishiba will continue to be prime minister, but he will be the leader of a fractured government. The Diet will be in session for 3 days, and then he leaves for Peru. Then he leaves for Brazil. It is possible at that time that he might travel to the United States to leave with the president-elect. The election will be finished by then, but it's not a guaranteed trip. As we've seen before, sometimes, although the election day is finished, it's not quite clear who the president is, and they're holding their horses just a little bit because there might be turmoil in the United States as well. I think there's anticipation for that. So there's a lot going on politically, geopolitically, what's going on in the region here. I'd like to turn it over to you once again, Maya, get back into the beefier part of the Q&A and do my best in addressing some of the questions, and also to encourage those of you who are as deeply involved in this sort of thing as I am, with your own views and your own assessments of what the situation is. So Maya?
Yes, thank you, Timothy. Before we continue with the questions we have accumulated, I would like to say once again thank you, this time to our other sponsor, that is Houze Inc. And Houze Inc. Offers bilingual services, once again, in English and in Japanese, in the fields of custom home design, construction, and renovation. They also do commercial building construction, so if you want to work with them, and we do recommend you do that if you have any such projects in mind, please connect with Hana Uroshizawa Howell on LinkedIn. You'll find her contact details in the description of the video on YouTube, and if you are already on LinkedIn, you can find her there. Hana Uroshizawa Howell and Houze Inc. Please connect, and thanks very much for this, Timothy. Now we are moving into the Q&A session. We have questions actually from before we started the briefing, so I'll start with them. They come from Byron Johnston, and please allow me to get there so that I can read them to you. I think that you partially answered one of them, but however, please allow me to go back, okay?
Okay.
You all right with this? Yes, okay. Sure. So, here we go. Oh, Byron, yes.
Your mic sounds so much better now. I don't know what you did, but it sounds great.
I have no idea. The wind is still here, but I'm glad that the mic sounds better. Okay, here we go. First, can the Democratic Party for the People meeting with both sides this time be regarded as a hardball politics to achieve their policy goals by making it apparent that they would not hesitate to join
Yeah,
with the opposite side of if there are sustained objections to their well thought through policy goals?
great question. That's from Byron.
Byron, yes.
Yeah. So, as you know, Byron, in a Japanese meeting, usually you have a meeting, everything's already been decided. It's just the formality of sitting around the table and everybody kind of endorsing what the decision was. Similarly, here in the negotiations between Mr. Ishiba and Mr. Tamaki, those negotiations, and yes, they are very hardball right now. And it's not Mr. Tamaki putting his reputation on the line, it's his lieutenants who are fighting and being very acerbic and being very insistent about what their positions are and banging that out in a fist fight in the closed doors and trying to figure out what are the parameters, how much they can get away with, and also offering the LDP a position. You know, these guys are a little bit snarly. I don't know. Let's try a different combination. Let's try a different potential party. Let's try something else to secure the majority because these guys want too much. It's going to cost too much. They want more than they deserve. That kind of negotiation is going on as well, or that kind of thought process. So what ultimately happens is that Mr. Tamaki and Mr. Ishiba will meet sometime this week and decide what has already been decided, or maybe cut the baby in half on some of the other issues, but they will come to terms with it. And I foresee that there will be a coalition, not quite a coalition. Mr. Tamaki wants to preserve his independence, but it will be a position where Mr. Ishiba will retain a premiership, and whoever is the other third party, we believe it'll be the Democratic Party of the People, what positions they're going to get and how they're going to be participating in the government. I hope that's sufficient, Byron, but if not, please, continue to feed us questions.
Yes, there is actually a continuation. It's a comment by Byron to this question. So Byron says, since both DPFP President Yuichiro Tamaki and Diet Affairs Chief Motohisa Furukawa were staff veterans of the Finance Ministry, they both can calculate the financial costs of each policy they advocate. Hence, they are not making frivolous demands. Yes, very, very true. And there is a lot to this, but I think that there are also, let's say, trade-offs for the party, the ruling party. And while the Democratic Party for the People, they are advocating these policies which make very good sense for the electorate. They're probably difficult to act on by the party in power. So it's not really easy to give that much revenue from tax for the party in power, and they can always say, well, if we don't get that much revenue, we probably cannot work on the infrastructure, or we cannot work on this or that, right? So there is always something that the party in power can say, and I think that, it's really difficult to give up on so much revenues, right, Timothy?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't have much to add. That's a great assessment there. The other kind of defining part here, it's somewhat unrelated, but it is related to how many votes you got and how many seats you have in the Diet. It was announced just yesterday how much state money is going to each of the political parties. The LDP is not getting the amount of subsidies it originally had. It is losing about 2.5% of that. And the Democratic Party for the People has increased their subsidies by 3.5%. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is several dozen million yen that is spent or that is given to the political parties because they're political parties. So the state provides them subsidies to run the political affairs of what it is they're doing. So the Democratic Party for the People is reaping lots of rewards for having, quadrupled the number of seats they had in the Diet. I think once they get a taste of that, they're going to like it. And you're going to see a lot coming out of Mr. Tamaki, I believe.
Thank you for this. And another question which just came in, and it will be cutting in the queue, but so it's from Hiroaki, and because it's relevant to this topic. So Hiroaki writes, before the voting for the next prime minister, is it theoretically possible to have a parliament debate or debates on the differences of economic policy?
No.
No. Okay,
No.
it's not possible. It's not
So,
election. Well, yeah. Okay, go
yeah.
ahead.
So let me just describe that a little bit. So the Diet is out of session. They just finished an election. For the Diet to open up, they must open up within 30 days of the election. For the Diet to open up, they must have a formal request to the emperor. It's a big ceremony. They walk the letter through the Diet and they deliver it. They hand deliver it to the emperor. The emperor says, yes, I think I'm free on the 11th, so I'll come by and I will open the Diet. So he comes in to open the Diet, and the Diet will be open from the 11th to the 14th, a very brief period of time. And the first order of business is to elect the prime minister. So you can't hold any other business, as Hiroaki is requesting a little bit of background on. Is there any opportunity for debate? There's not. First order of business is the parliament must have a prime minister. I hope that's responsive, Hiroaki. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Moving to Clubhouse now with a question from Ted Gover, which came in the beginning
Ted.
of. Yes, hello, Ted. Thank you so very much for being with us today. So, Timothy, you ready for the question, right?
Well, it's coming from Ted, so you never know.
You never know, right? Okay, what can you tell us about some of these small conservative populist parties like Sanseito and Reiwa Shinsengumi? What do they stand for, and do you see them having an influence on policy? Also, do you see their influence increasing on the way forward?
Yes, I do. And that's a great question, a great observation. They have also seen that nobody was talking about the Democratic Party for the People. Even Mr. Tamaki had not anticipated how great his win would be. He didn't even have enough candidates to fill the slots. They received so many votes, disproportionate. There are two ways you vote. You vote for the individual. Oh my gosh. Happy New Year. You vote for the individual because you believe in his policies or his reputation or his character. But there's also a list of people that you would vote for, and you vote for the party. And the party itself packs the names into that list. The voters don't do that. The voters vote for an individual on one hand, and on the second ballot, they vote for the party. And the number of people that voted for the Democratic Party for the People was so great that they got all of the members on their list, plus 4 more. They could have gotten 4 more seats, or at least 3, and they didn't have candidates for it. So Shinseito and some of the other minor parties are looking at this and saying, there is a role for us. There's a place in politics for us, even though we have only 1 member or 2 members, or we only have a member in the lower house, or maybe only in the upper house. We should continue to fight. We should continue to promote that. The other thing that's unrelated to this, but I think it reflects on this, and it's something I'm sure, Ted, you follow, is the number of truancies in Japan has exploded. I didn't make it a part of the original briefing, but the truancies that have been going on in Japan are at a record high. In junior high and high school, there are 415,000 truancies in 2023. So the fiscal year ended in March. So these are numbers from that period of time. Just from elementary school, 47,000 kids are truant. That means they're not showing up for school. This is the 11th year of increasing truancy. High school, 68,000. And somewhat related to this, the number of suicides of junior high school and high school students is 397, down slightly from last year, which was 411. Nobody likes to see those numbers at all. What this tells you, though, is that the number of, I mean, in Japan, you either go to school or you don't. There's no third rail. In the United States, you could perhaps go to homeschooling, or in some other countries, you're not required by law to go to school. Here in Japan, you are. So truancy is a big deal. And I think a lot of kids are just also probably the layover from COVID, but some kids are saying, I don't need to go to school. I hate going to school. I hate being told what to do. I hate the regimentation. And everything that I need to know, I can learn on Google. I can learn on the internet. So there's that kind of thread that's going through Japanese society as well. And it does affect politics. And so I think it's a great observation, a great question, Ted. These kind of minor parties, what's their view? What is their outlook like? And I think, yes, a lot of people want to be distinguished by the political views that they hold. And not everybody fits into the LDP or the Constitutional Democratic Party, although that's where the numbers go. But the homogeneous aspect of Japanese culture is beginning to break down. And you can see that in politics. You can see it in religion. You can see it in high school truancy as well. So it's a very interesting thing. Japan is going through a lot of changes right now. And it's not just there, it's, geopolitically too. Everybody wants to have a piece of the defense and security of Japan. It is just amazing. 10 years ago, who would have thought that we would be talking about these issues? But thanks very much, Ted. Great question.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. I'm almost new, or still new to this, muting my cell phone and off. Then anyway, so thank you, Timothy, for that. We have a great question, or a couple of great questions from Yuka as well. And after that, I have a couple of questions to you from myself. But I would like to go to Yuka's questions first. So she says, Timothy, thank you very much for answering them in advance. And Yuka, thank you for being with us this morning. For you, it is evening, I know. We appreciate your time spent with us. So here we go. Mr. Amari, the former Secretary General of the LDP, lost his seat in the election on the 29th. He served as the chairman of the Semiconductor Strategy Promotion Parliamentary Group and played a key role in promoting the semiconductor industry. With Mr. Amari gone, will semiconductor support policies be toned down?
I was disappointed that Mr. Amari lost. He is a great politician. He is, he was the point person for TPP, the negotiations between Japan and the United States, and not just Japan and the United States, but also TPP, the regional trading bloc. He's very suave. He was Secretary General, as you pointed out, and he gave up Secretary General. He was not elected because everybody loved his name and because of his character. So he didn't win on that vote, but he flopped over into the list. So he put his name on the list just in case, as a safety. And he didn't win based on his name recognition and the power of his personality, but he was elected based on the number of votes the LDP got. As a consequence of that, he did have to retire. People said, you've lost so much prestige as a consequence of the way that you were elected to the Diet. So we're going to have somebody else. And that's when Mr. Motegi stepped in. But Mr. Amari is a sharp cookie. And in this last election, I think it's just a tumble downhill. He also didn't win on the list because the LDP did so poorly. So it's sad to see him go, but there are always, the way the Japanese government moves and the way the bureaucracy moves is they put somebody in a position, they keep them there for 3 or 4 years, and then they transfer them out. So they create generalists. So I'm sure there's somebody of the same stature as Mr. Amari was, 5 or 6 years ago, coming up in in the same process. So I'm still hopeful. I think the Japanese system, the Japanese way of creating these kinds of specialists is a good combination, and it seems to serve them well. There aren't any bright lights, there aren't any geniuses, there aren't any multimillionaires that generally participate. It's pretty much not plain vanilla, but a regular raft of specialists that come to the fore, and many of them, like Mr. Amari, they were in the bureaucracy and they came into politics. Many of the politicians come that route, so it generates a bit of stability and a kind of unitary thought process. It does provide a strength there, certainly a weakness as well, but I think the strengths outweigh the weaknesses, particularly when you have somebody as prominent as Amari was in this area to be gone from the scene, and somebody else will fill in for him. I'm very confident of that. But yes, I too am sorry to see him leave, but it's a great observation.
Right. Thank you for that. We have another question on LinkedIn from Seiichiro Manabe-san. So Manabe-san, thank you so very much again for being with us this morning. And then I'm going to read this out to you, Timothy. The agreement with Poland on technical cooperation in nuclear power generation and renewable energy is an important deal. Could future administrations and policies have an impact on it?
Okay, so what Manabe-san is talking about is there was an agreement between Poland and Japan on production of nuclear energy. I'm not familiar with what was going on there. I imagine it is the purchase of nuclear power generating stations to go to Poland, but I'm unfamiliar. I can't really comment with much heat or light on that. But Manabe-san, if you're that deeply entrenched in it, why don't you come up on stage and educate us on why this is such a big deal?
Oh yes, or probably share your yes, because we still have difficulty with Clubhouse, having people talk there and for everybody to hear that. But maybe if you have time and can type, please share your thoughts with us on this. And well, Manabe-san actually writes, in addition to that, to be precise, the main category is reducing CO2 emissions from thermal power generation. So yes, if you can elaborate on that, please do. And we'll be happy, to learn from you as well, because we are always open to assistance, help, and to learning ourselves. Okay, and then Timothy, I would like to ask you something about Ishiba-san. So there was, some observers before the election on the 27th thought that if LDP lost, Ishiba-san might step down to take the responsibility for that loss. He hasn't done that. And so why and what does indicate, for, the policies and politics on the way forward? Because the LDP did lose a lot of seats, yet Ishiba-san is still here.
Yeah. So there was a lot of speculation going on there. Can you turn your mic off, please? There you go. There was a lot of speculation going on there about who should take blame, who's going to step down, what's going to happen. And I think the final analysis is that when the Diet collects again, the first order of business must be to select the new prime minister. And no matter how you shake it out, the LDP with Komeito is the largest bloc. So even if there's the first round and everybody votes for their own prime minister, that means nobody's selected as prime minister. That means it goes into the second round. And in the second round, whoever got the largest number of votes and whoever got the second largest number of votes, it's a runoff there. And so when you just look at it that way, just very flatly, not blaming anybody, but just saying, who's going to be, the number of votes. That's why we talked about, who won, who lost, how many did you lose. It dictates who's going to be even though the prime minister might not be everybody's favorite, he got the largest number of votes. And I think any way you shake it, as long as the LDP is not sick to death of Mr. Ishiba, he will be the candidate. He's the president of the LDP. it's not inconceivable that somebody else could be offered as the prime minister candidate, and Mr. Ishiba remains as the party president. That's feasible, but I think Mr. Ishiba is calling the shots, and he's saying, I want to continue being prime minister. Let's limp through it. Let's try and cobble it together, because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow's a new day. So even though it looks bad, and my standing, the public approval for my administration is in the low 30s, and I'm approaching that danger zone, we're only going to have the diet for 3 or 4 days, and then I'm off to Peru, I'm off to Brazil, I'm off to see, maybe Mr. Trump, and then I come back victorious, and I don't have to do anything until the diet session starts in January. And in that meantime, maybe we'll have a supplemental budget, maybe something happens, and people have to just, bore through what the administration is. The cabinet that I set up and the prime ministership that I hold now, let's just go forward with that. I think that's the more guaranteed path, this being Japan and this being Japanese politics. But once again, you just never know. It's politics.
It's politics, yes. And I believe that there are still a lot of members of the LDP who do wish to see Takaichi-san, yes, in the seat, the driving seat of the LDP. But of course, we know that it's not going to happen for a bit, right? So.
Okay, can we talk about that just a little bit? Because it is kind of inconceivable that Takaichi Sensei would be nominated as the candidate for prime minister. It's Ishiba. They've already finished that battle, and if they were going to switch horses, I don't think it would be Takaichi. She was the arm of the Abe faction, you'll recall. They did poorly. She helped and endorsed and campaigned for many members in the Abe faction, many of whom who lost their positions, but some of them who won, and they are very much indebted to her for doing that. But it doesn't eclipse what Mr. Ishiba has. And secondly, in the current situation, there are people that are much more attractive to fill that role if Mr. Ishiba decides he's going to fall on his sword, he's going to take responsibility in order to preserve the LDP. And I think that would probably be the Chief Cabinet Secretary, Mr. Hayashi, who is with the Kishida faction. He's number 2 in the Kishida faction. And Mr. Ishiba became prime minister because of Mr. Kishida, because of Mr. Suga. So you've got that block there. The Takaichi block is maybe Mr. Aso. He would support her, but it's a little bit. She's a little bit off the schedule, I think, with regard to the voters. The voters are more middle of the road, and she's in a different situation. Maybe with China becoming much more bombastic, she might be a more attractive candidate. But Mr. Ishiba says, I'm a defense specialist, so in the event of kinetic action, you probably want me rather than somebody else. I used to be defense minister as a kind of a war prime minister, if that sort of thing happens. So I think Miss Takaichi has to just keep her powder dry and wait for the next election, and maybe a no confidence motion, which could possibly come up towards the spring. But I think for right now, the game is pretty much decided until March or April. There'll be a lot of goings on, but I think it won't reach a heated pitch until March or April.
Well, thank you very much for the clarification. And Timothy, I know this is your favorite part of this briefing. Oh, no, sorry. So we've got one comment from Hiroko-san, okay? It just came in, so please allow me to read it out so that you can hear it and everybody else. So she writes, Mr. Hashimoto, the former Ishin's leader, was furious about Mr. Baba's comments after the election. I kind of understand his anger. Do you think Mr. Baba can hold his position, as the Ishin members are very concerned about the upper house election next year? What's your take on this, Timothy?
Well, it's no secret that I like Baba a lot. He and I go back many, many years. I think he's doing a great job. I think it's a hard job. There are actually three leaders of Ishin. You've got not just Mr. Toru, but you've got the governor of Tokyo of Osaka Prefecture as well. Any of those three could be the party leader, but Mr. Baba is the one that's doing all of the work. And should there be um, an opportunity for Ishin, for example, instead of the Democratic Party for the People to be the darling, for it to be Baba, Baba would put his own name up there, and maybe that's what they're worried about, that he doesn't deserve it, or he didn't do well enough, or Ishin didn't do well enough, and it's your fault. People love to do that, and plus it's a Osaka-based party, so of course they're very different from Tokyo people, and they love to excel in that characteristic of being a Osaka person, if you know what I mean. I think he'll have a bit of a hard time, but Mr. Baba is the one that's in the hot seat, and the decisions that he makes are ones that he lives by. I hope to see him continue, but I'm a bit biased on that. I think he's a great politician.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying this and answering the question of Hiroko-san as well. And with this, yes, it seems that we have
Hey.
gone through the comments and questions today. To everybody watching us, thanks for staying with us and watching, of course, on any of the platforms you prefer. If you have any comments, any questions during the week, please do share them on your platform of choice so that we can address them next week. During the briefing, we will be here once again at 8:20 on Sunday morning, next Sunday. Before that, 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning, when we will be talking with Professor Joe Huck about startups in Japan and other topics, business topics. Also, Timothy, thanks a lot. I think that you and Dan Harada are going to have one more briefing on Friday next week, talking about the results of the election of Prime Minister this time. So to everybody, if you're interested in that, the insights from Dan and Timothy, tune in on LinkedIn and YouTube. That will be Friday, 12 o'clock noon, so that you can learn more. In the meantime, yes, Timothy, do you have any comments on this?
No, it's just the wind is really distracting.
I'm so sorry for this. I'll be very quick. Okay, and we also, once again, I would like to say a big thank you to our two sponsors, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku or Kanchu, and James at Kanchu.com. Also, Houze Inc. and Howell, thanks a lot for your sponsorship. Thanks a lot for your friendship as well and your help always. It's a pleasure to promote you here on this podcast and to give you more visibility. Well, that's all for today. To everybody who stayed with us, have a great weekend. In Japan, we have one more day off. Tomorrow is the Culture Day, so it's a public holiday here, and we're going to. Nobody's going to be at work, or maybe the majority is not going to be at work. Yes, I can see that and hear Timothy being very happy about that. Okay, that's all for today. Enjoy the day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
See you next
everybody.
time. Thank you.
Bye, Maya.
Bye, Timothy.